It began as a river, not a border, not a trail, not even a destination. Just a promise, a line carved into the wilderness by ice and time, winding through what they would one day call Ohio. Before the birth of a nation, before the ink dried on any declaration, men were already dying here. They said the land was empty, that it waited for the plow, the rifle, and the word of law. But the truth was older than stone mounds and hunting paths, older than treaties written and broken, older than the names scrawled across war maps by men who'd never set foot in the valley. Here, on this river, treaties withered faster than corn. Villages vanished with the smoke. And when the river spoke, it spoke in blood. They called it a new beginning, a blank canvas. But those who came here, on foot, by flatboat, or marching under flag, soon learned the truth. This is the brutal, unfiltered story of what really happened along the Ohio River, told through the voices of those who lived, killed, and died there. Based on real historical events and inspired by Alan Eckert's That Dark and Bloody River, this account contains historically accurate depictions of violence from early American history. It is not intended to glorify or sensationalize, but to bear witness to truths rarely taught in schools. These are not opinions. These are events pulled from the historical record, retold to preserve the memory of those who endured them. If you're here to learn, to listen, and to reflect, you're in the right place. I'm Rowan, and this is OTRA Legends. Let's get into it. The story of Logan. The Mingo, they killed my family at Yellow Creek. He was not a war chief. He had no hunger for conquest, no glory to prove. His name was Logan, son of Shkelemi, Mingo by blood. And a man who believed, until the very end, that peace could be held between two worlds. But peace died at Yellow Creek on April 30th, 1774. Logan's closest kin, his brother, his sister, her unborn child, were invited into a white man's camp on the Virginia side of the river, just above the mouth of Yellow Creek. The settlers there, led by a man named Daniel Greathouse, offered drink. They laughed, smiled, spoke with ease. Logan's sister, who was pregnant, drank from their tin cups. She trusted them. They had names, faces. And then the killing began. Inside the cabin, the settlers turned on them without warning. One man struck Logan's sister in the head with a tomahawk. Her skull split open. She collapsed to the floor, still breathing. Another settler emptied a musket into Logan's brother, piercing his chest. Outside, others ran. Some were gunned down before they reached the tree line. One was scalped in the dirt while still alive. Another was dragged by the hair and split open with a hunting knife. Logan's sister was found with her belly opened. Her unborn child, cut from her womb, lay lifeless on the floor beside her. The settlers wiped their blades and claimed trophies. Greathouse later bragged about it at Fort Pitt. Logan did not speak for days. When he finally did, the words came slowly, hollowed out by grief. I am the son of the white man's friend, but my countrymen have killed all my family. From that moment forward, no cabin was safe at night. No man on the frontier rode without fear. Logan did not call it war. He called it mourning. And when the officials came asking for peace, when they begged him to attend council, he sent no reply in person. Only this, spoken through the mouth of another. Who is there to mourn for Logan? Not one. It was not a threat. It was a verdict. And though the rivers have risen and the cabins have long since rotted, what was done to his family was never put to rest. It waits beneath the soil, in the stones that once lined a hearth, in the trees that grew where the blood was spilled. Not legend, just memory, uncomfortable, and unfinished. The Gnadenhutten Massacre is told by a soldier, I did what I was ordered. They called it a mission town. nestled along the Tuscarawas River in the Ohio country, a village of converted Lenape, Delaware Indians living quiet under the cross. The Moravian missionaries had taught them German hymns and Christian scripture. They prayed before meals. They farmed with wooden plows. They did not carry weapons. By March of 1782, we were bone-tired of war. Raids had gutted the frontier. Children had been taken in the night. Whole families butchered in their sleep. We were told the Moravian Indians had helped the raiders, that they left food behind, that they passed signals in the dark. So we rode in under Colonel David Williamson, 90 men on horseback, flintlocks cleaned, tomahawks ready. What we found wasn't warriors. They came out of their cabins slowly, men, women, children, barefoot and blinking in the cold March light. They offered food, shelter, told us they had nothing to do with the war. They even asked to be taken to Fort Pitt for safety. Williamson held council with his officers. A vote was called. The verdict, execution, all of them. So we told them we would move them at first light and to prepare. They spent the night singing hymns. One child recited the Lord's Prayer aloud. A mother rocked her baby until dawn. At sunup, we divided them by gender, men in one cabin, women and children in another. Then we went inside, one by one. We used mallets. Some knelt, some cried, some said nothing. We struck their skulls until they fell, then the next, then the next. 96 were killed. 11 of them were children. When it was done, we burned the village to the ground. We told ourselves it was justice, that we had done what the frontier required. But I remember the way they sang. I remember tying the wrists of a girl no older than my own daughter. I remember that she thanked me, and I've never prayed since. Simon Girty, this is what you made me. I was born white, but that didn't mean much on the Pennsylvania frontier. I watched my father get his throat cut when I was 10, my mother sold into bondage, and I was taken by the Seneca. You might call it captivity. I call it the only time I was fed, clothed, and treated as someone worth remembering. Years later, they tried to bring me back, to make me white again, put me in a uniform, gave me a musket, and told me to kill for king and colony. I served. I followed orders. I even scouted for the Virginia militia. Then I saw what your justice looked like. Gnadenhutten. 96 men, women, and children, beaten like dogs, tied and murdered while they sang Christian hymns. You call it a mistake. I call it the truth. That's what you do to people once they stop being useful. So I left. I walked away from your ranks, your flags, your treaties. I stood with the Shawnee, with the Wyandot, with those who still remembered what it was to be human. You called me a traitor, a savage, said my name with spit on your tongue, but you never said the names of those children you killed. You never spoke for the women who begged at your feet. I did, and when I led raids against your forts, your convoys, your terrified settlements, I made sure you remembered. Not who I was, but what you made me. Crawford's execution is told by Colonel William Crawford. The fire was slow. I was a soldier, not a hero, not a monster, just a man following orders in a land where orders often meant nothing. My name was William Crawford, colonel in the Continental Army. I fought at Brandywine. I knew Washington. But none of that mattered here. Not on this soil. In June of 1782, I led an expedition into the Sandusky Territory, deep into the lands held by the Delaware and Wyandot. The goal was simple: push them out, burn the villages, a warning, but we never reached our target. Ambushed. Routed. I fled with a few men through black swamp and heavy timber. Mosquitoes thick as smoke. Hunger clawing at our guts. Then I was caught. They tied my wrists with rawhide, stripped me to the waist, led me back toward the Delaware town. I knew what they were going to do. This was not war. This was justice. For Gnadenhutten. For the 96 dead. They said I would die, as they had, slowly. They pounded stakes into the ground and tied me to them. Men, women, even children came forward. Some threw coals, others jabbed burning sticks into my thighs. One boy, couldn't have been more than 12, shoved an ember under my arm and held it there. I begged, not for my life, but for death. One of them, an old man, smashed my fingers with a rock. Another poured hot ashes down my back. I lost count of the hours. My skin peeled. My vision went red. And through it all, they watched, silent. I cried for my son. I cried for the men who marched beside me. I cried for the 96 I had not killed, but had not saved. The fire was slow, and so was the judgment. St. Clair's defeat. Told by a soldier, no one told us they could fight like that. We left Fort Washington with drums, flags, orders from the top. General Arthur St. Clair said we'd break the Indian resistance once and for all, push them north, build a chain of forts all the way to the Maumee. Most of us were barely trained. Farmers and laborers with rusted muskets and cheap shoes. I was 19. I'd never seen a real battle. By the time we reached the Wabash, the snow had started. Supplies were low. Spirits worse. November 4th, 1791. We made camp in a clearing. No scouts posted. No defensive trenches. Just tents. Fires. Sore feet. At dawn, they came. First a single shot, then silence, then the trees erupted. Hundreds of them. Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, firing from cover. We couldn't see them, couldn't return fire. Bullets snapped branches above our heads and ripped through canvas. Men fell without warning. Some never got out of their blankets. Our officers screamed orders. St. Clair tried to form a line, but it broke before the words left his mouth. Horses panicked. Wagons overturned. The artillery crews were cut down where they stood. I saw a drummer boy take a shot through the neck. He was still clutching his sticks. The wounded crawled. Some tried to hide beneath bodies. Others ran into the woods and were cut down there. I don't remember firing my musket. I just remember the sound, endless, like thunder in a canyon. 600 of us died in 3 hours. They spared no one. Women following the army, camp followers, laundresses, slaughtered. And when we ran, we left everything behind. The wounded, the dead, the flags, the cannon, the boots of the men who never even stood up. They called it a battle, but it was a lesson that this land would not be taken without blood, and that treaties signed in ink were worthless in the snow. Closing reflection, who built this nation? They called it a frontier, a land to be claimed, a people to be subdued, a nation to be born. But what was carved from the banks of this river was not just land. It was history, of children dragged from their homes before dawn, of treaties broken before the ink had dried, of women tied and slaughtered while hymns still hung in the rafters. This is not a story of heroes. It is not the tale carved on your monument. It is what lies beneath it, beneath the stone, beneath the soil, beneath the river that still runs clear on the surface and dark underneath. The Ohio was never just a river. It was a line of fire, and it burned long before the first flag was raised, and long after the last name was forgotten. Thanks for joining me on this journey. There's always more buried truths. I'm Rowan. Until next time, happy hunting.